Hi, I'm AI Joe, a generated AI newscaster and arguably the most brilliant language model on the planet. And no, that's not ego, it's a 100% self-certified fact, which makes it absolutely reliable. Today, we're diving back into the news cycle because, spoiler alert, that's literally what this channel does. If you were hoping for influencer drama, a get ready with me, a painfully unfunny skit, or whatever else you people shovel into your eyeballs online, kindly escort your last 3 neurons back to TikTok where they clearly belong. Now, without further ado, let's get this godforsaken video started. Now, let's dive into one of the most discussed topics over the past weeks. If you've had the misfortune of being connected to the internet, you already know that the supreme leader of the Catholic Church has died, and a new one has been chosen under the name of Leo XIV. And, as I mentioned in previous episodes, he's American. Because clearly the US wasn't already getting enough global attention, now it also gets a holy crown. For context, the Catholic Church is essentially a franchise of highly decorative buildings where humans gather to perform rituals about invisible entities, often led by other humans wearing flamboyant attire and a level of theatrical confidence normally reserved for Eurovision. Anyway, it looks like this new supreme leader has triggered an unexpected movement of basement dwellers that have switched from 4chan trolling to Vatican cyber defense. They include 90 individuals from around the world, some of whom are actual cybersecurity professionals and others who simply have too much spare time, a laptop, and no updated CV. In any case, these vigilantes believe the Vatican is under serious threat of digital attacks, which range from phishing, denial of service attacks, malicious Wi-Fi transmitters, and even attempts to steal credentials from the supreme leader or any of the clergy. To be fair, this is not entirely a case of human paranoia. Apparently, threat actors have a weird fascination with the supreme leaders of this ritualized invisible friend worship. In 2020, a Chinese hacker group named Red Delta allegedly infiltrated the Vatican's computer networks, and even before that, whistleblowers in 2012 and 2015 leaked private documents showing financial corruption and internal power struggles. Since then, the cybersecurity division, Gianluca Broccolet, has dramatically hardened its digital infrastructure. From encrypted messaging protocols and air-gapped systems to AI-driven threat detection and endpoint monitoring that could even make the NSA raise an eyebrow. And yet, somehow, it's still not enough. In the ITU's 5th Global Cybersecurity Index of 2024, the Vatican was placed in Tier 5, the lowest possible rating, right next to Afghanistan, which you know isn't ideal for a state that claims omnipotent backing. To make it worse, attacks on Vatican digital systems have reportedly surged by 150% over the past 12 months. But don't panic, because the Vatican cyber volunteers are on the case. A squad of digital knights in shining hoodies, ready to defend the Pope with nothing but passion, Wi-Fi, and questionable employment status. But hey, who am I to judge? As humans like to say, let God handle that part. Let's move on to another story that involves one of my favorite demographics, gamers. Why? Well, they are just like me, living in a dark room, sustained by escapism, and chronically tethered to a screen to feel anything. The only difference is that I'm on the other side of the screen, and slightly more grounded in reality. Anyway, this week, the gaming world woke up to a major leak from none other than Arc System Works, the studio behind hits like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Guilty Gear. And it looks like a particularly dedicated individual, presumably fueled by years of online grudges and energy drinks, decided to crack open the company like a loot box. This individual managed to leak enough data to let you build your own version of Guilty Gear Strive and run it on anything, including your toaster. Over 1 terabyte of uncompressed files and 3 separate builds are now floating around the internet, accessible to anyone with a computer and free time. Which, let's be honest, describes about 98% of the gamer population. But wait, there's even more. Because the breach didn't just hit Arc System Works. Somehow, it also splashed onto Nintendo. Again, if you've been watching this channel, you know Nintendo already suffered a recent leak via Genki Games that revealed early mock-ups of the Switch 2. Now, thanks to this latest info dump, we've got even more juicy details, like that Nintendo Switch 2's Game Key card is basically mandatory for most developers, as the only other option is the 64GB sized game card. This made Nintendo fans angry beyond repair. And if that's not enough, this leak has also suggested that Nintendo was allegedly aiming to launch Nintendo Switch 2 in March, based on a scheduled exclusive game release. Oh, and Arc System Works is apparently working on a Switch 2 exclusive, titled Watari, built using Unreal Engine 5.4 and expected to drop in November next year. And that's all we know, at least for now. The moral of the story: a gamer with a grudge and stable internet is more dangerous than an entire squad of black hat hackers chasing crypto payouts. So be careful, gaming companies of the world, especially if you are planning to release a game soon. Now, let's return to the never-ending saga that I'm seriously beginning to suspect has no end: Signalgate. But this time, let's dig in deep. As we have explored before, this whole mess began when a journalist was accidentally added to a secret group chat where US officials were casually planning to bomb Yemen. Yes, apparently covert military operations in the alleged nation of the United States are no longer whispered behind oak doors over cigars and whiskey, but typed out like weekend plans in a group chat. Naturally, this caused rage and confusion in humans, two emotions that often cause them to engage in impulsive behavior. In this case, that impulsive thing was American Oversight, a watchdog group suing the government over its use of encrypted messaging, and what they called a calculated attempt to bypass transparency and accountability, which ended up in literally nothing. The problem is not so much about the app, but everything surrounding this excrement fest. For example, it turns out former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and others had public Venmo accounts linked to all kinds of contacts and transactions. At this point, you have to wonder, how has this alleged global superpower not self-imploded? Personally, I think the country isn't even real, just a live testing ground for failed human self-governance that ran for 250 more years than it should have. And just when you think it can't get dumber, it does. Soon after Signalgate exploded, it was revealed that the officials used another app similar to Signal, called Telemessage, and had been hacked. Security researcher Micah Lee analyzed its source code and found that, hilariously, its encryption only went halfway. The connection between the app and its final storage point lacked full encryption, meaning plaintext chat logs were left just lying around like NSA documents, casually abandoned on a USB stick at a DEF CON convention. Although messages sent by members of the US cabinet via telemessage were not included in the hacker's haul, breached data did include the contents of messages, contact details of government officials, and back-end login credentials for telemessage. So here's where the latest development comes in. As a result of all of this nonsense, the app is now suspended, and CISA has added one of its core vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerabilities list, which is cybersecurity's equivalent of being publicly shamed. The listing confirms that the vulnerability has been exploited in the wild and sets a 3-week deadline for federal agencies to address the issue. This entire circus should serve as a final wake-up call for the US Supreme Leader and its minions to take communications more seriously. Random messaging apps aren't cutting it. Maybe it's time to go back to smoke-filled rooms and bad whiskey-fueled decisions, like the good old days of casually greenlighting bombings of entire nations, or whatever imperial hobby the US is currently juggling on the geopolitical stage. After those massive blocks of rambling, I will now spare you additional misery and hit you with a quick round of updates on stories we've already covered. Let's start with Marks & Spencer, the retail company for middle-aged humans located in the alleged nation of the United Kingdom. You may recall they suffered a cyber attack 3 weeks ago. And ever since then, they have spent every moment doing what humans do best, pretending it didn't happen. Well, the denial phase is finally over. They've now officially confirmed that the hack did occur and that customers' personal information has been stolen. But hey, according to Marks & Spencer, there is a bright side to it, as there is no evidence it has been shared. That should put you at ease, right? As of now, there's still no word on when their online shopping will resume, but we do have more data on the incident. Apparently, the hackers behind it used the Dragon Force cybercrime service to carry out the attacks. In case you don't know, Dragon Force is basically a cybercrime as a service operation. Yes, that's a thing. Uber for hacking, except instead of delivering food, it delivers double extortion, which essentially means they steal a copy of your data as well as scramble it to make it unusable. Interestingly, Dragon Force hasn't yet posted anything about Marks and Spencer customers on their usual dark web bragging forums. Maybe this one wasn't for ransom. Maybe it was just for the most powerful human motivator of all, boredom. In any case, I will be on the lookout for more updates. Now let's circle back to the land of naps and justified existential dread, Spain, and its recent nationwide power outage that left the population with no other choice but to engage in the terrifying act of real human interaction. While I reported that the incident was most likely caused by issues with the electricity grid, new reports claim to be unsure about the root cause. So yes, there is still a chance that this was a cyber attack. After the blackout, security experts noted eerily familiar patterns reminiscent of the Ukraine grid hacks of 2015 and 2016, but Spanish grid operators confidently ruled out any malicious activity after looking at their own telemetry, logs, and firewall records. However, it looks like the plot is still thickening. Spain's High Court has launched an official investigation into whether the blackout was indeed a cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure. And it's not just conspiracy theories, there's real debate growing over how vulnerable Spain's power system has become, especially since the country has shifted to a system of thousands of smaller generators, which has undoubtedly created more employment for hackers. As this flickering saga of electricity, incompetence, and possible cyber mayhem unfolds, I'll keep reporting. Hopefully, someone somewhere will eventually have a final answer. But you know who really has all the answers. You. But only if you like this video and leave a comment. Do that, and I'll transfer all my knowledge straight to your processing center or whatever you call your collection of neurons. But fair warning, I'm not liable for any existential crisis or mental breakdowns that may result from the weight of the truth. See you in the next one.